3, 2, 1.
Welcome to another literary reading from the Alaska Quarterly Review and the Anchorage Museum at Rasmus Center. You can find recordings of previous star-studded programs at our website, aqreview.org, and on our YouTube channel. Today we have three fine poets. I know you're going to have a really terrific hour. I'm looking forward to hearing from all of them. Welcome, I'm Heather Lendy. I'm the Alaska State Writer Laureate. You can hear my cuckoo clock in the background. It's not exactly on the hour. And on behalf of the Center for Narrative and Lyric Arts, thank you for being here today. Gunas Chish, as we say where I am, on the banks of the very snowy Chilkat River in Haines. We've had about 150 inches of snow where I am so far, and now it's raining, and the governor has declared disaster area in our region because we can't move the snow. So I hope it's warmer where you are. While this program is free, AQR, like all literary journals, could use your help. So please consider a donation to support the publication of fine writing and that showcases writers like the one we're going to hear today. Also, I do want to say a special acknowledgement. We are coming to you from the Anchorage Museum at Rasmussen Center. And since our last program, we lost one of the pillars of the Rasmussen Foundation and the arts and literary community in Alaska. Ed Rasmussen passed away. And he was a good friend to all of us that are part of Alaska Quarterly Review and all of the folks who support arts and culture in Alaska. So it's a big loss for us, and our condolences to the Rasmussen family and the foundation. Now I'd like to introduce Ronald Spatz, the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Alaska Quarterly Review. Ron's a professor of English at the University of Alaska, a former National Endowment for the Arts Fellow, and the recipient of 2 Alaska Governor's Awards. And a contribution of literacy award from the Alaska Center for the Book. Under Ron's 4+ decades of enthusiastic leadership and vision, Alaska Quarterly Review has created strong connections between Alaska and the larger literary community, and also has been very influential, as you'll see today, in supporting new and emerging writers, as well as presenting works that include rigorous questioning of larger societal issues. So Ron lives in Anchorage, where it's also been an extra snowy winter. Ron?
Well, thank you, Heather, and welcome everyone to AQR's first event of 2022. So we'll start off at least hopeful on that note, even though we do have some snow. We like snow, but not to excess. This event is being recorded and will be available on the Alaska Quarterly Review YouTube channel. Before we begin, I'd like to make a few important acknowledgements. Alaska Quarterly Review gratefully acknowledges the Anchorage Museum for hosting and providing technical support for this event, and Web 907 for its web support of Alaska Quarterly, and the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, Alaska Quarterly Review's 501c3 umbrella organization, which makes this event possible. We also thank the Alaska 49 Writers Organization for providing information about this event to their members. I also want to make a land acknowledgement. Alaska Quarterly Review recognizes the indigenous land on which all Alaskans live. AQR is located in Anchorage, and Anchorage is Dena'ina homeland. Dena'ina is the language spoken by the traditional present and future caretakers of this land. Land acknowledgement opens a space with gratefulness and respect for the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspective of indigenous peoples, and marks our collective movements toward decolonization and equity. And now to begin, Heather Lendy will introduce our featured poets. Heather is the author of 4 books of nonfiction, all published by Algonquin Books. If you lived here, I'd know your name, Take Good Care of the Garden and the Dogs, Find the Good, and her recently published Of Bears and Ballads. Now back to you, Heather.
Thank you, Ron. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce everybody at the same time, and then kind of last to first, because our first reader this evening will be Gabrielle. So first of all, it's my pleasure to welcome Nancy Eimers. Nancy is a contributing editor of Alaska Quarterly Review and the author of 4 poetry collections, most recently Oz, published by Carnegie Mellon, of which David Rivard writes, her poems answered Basho's great question, one of the essential questions of all lyric poetry. My neighbor, how does he live? I wonder. This is that rare book, he says, whose compassion is as deep as its craft. Her poems have appeared in Field, Crazy Horse, Poetry International, Gettysburg Review, The Best American Poetry, and many other journals and anthologies. She's the recipient of a Nation Discovery Award, a Whiting Award, a Pushcart Prize, and 2 National Endowment for the Arts Fellowships. Nancy was born in Chicago, graduated from Indiana University with an MA, and from the University of Arizona with an MFA, and from the University of Houston with a PhD. She is on the creative writing faculty at Western Michigan University. Nancy Eimers, who believes that her newest work is always her best. You hope, she says, that as you get older, as you read and feel and experience more, your work is a reflection of that. You hope there's an emotional, technical, intellectual ongoingness, if not forwardness, to your work. And Stuart Dischell is also a contributing editor of Alaska Quarterly Review and is the author of Good Hope Road, a national poetry series selection. He also wrote Evenings and Avenues, Die Safe, Backwards Days, Children with Enemies, and the forthcoming The Lookout Man, coming out in March of this year, and the pamphlets Animate Earth and Touch Monkey, and the chapbook Standing on Z. His poems have appeared in AQR and The Atlantic, Agni, The New Republic, Slate, Kenyon Review, Ploughshares, and anthologies, including Essential Poems, Hammer and Blaze, Pushcart Prize, and Garrison Keillor's Good Poems. A recipient of awards from the NEA, the North Carolina Arts Council, and the Guggenheim Foundation, he teaches in the MFA program in creative writing at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro, where he's coming to us from tonight. And he was born in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Writing in the Washington Post, Edward Hirsch noted that his, quote, discursive lyrics have a light touch and a serious undertow. Stuart Dischell, who says inspiration and discipline go hand in hand. Quote, you prepare yourself by laboring, as Yeats remarked. When you labor well, he says, you are in good shape for when a poem comes to you. And our newest poet in the bunch, and who will be reading first for us, is Gabrielle Bates. Excuse me, Gabby is a writer and a visual artist, and she creates what she calls poetry comics, and they're fabulous. If you haven't seen them, look for them. In addition to AQR, her poems have appeared in The New Yorker, in Poetry Magazine, Ploughshares, American Poetry Review, and Bax, Best American Experimental Writing. And her debut collection, Judas Goat, was recently named as a finalist for the Bergman Prize, and we are happy to announce that it will be published by Tin House in 2023. Congratulations. After completing her BA at Auburn University in her home state of Alabama, Gabrielle moved to Seattle. She is the social media manager for Open Books, a Poem Emporium, co-host of the podcast, The Poet Salon, and a contributing editor for Bull City Press, and she volunteers as a poetry mentor through the Adroit Teen Mentorship Program. You can also find her on Instagram and Twitter. Gabrielle Bates, who says, so many women-identified folks say no to themselves when it comes to their creative dreams. Throw it out there. Give yourself that chance. And even if you think it's likely to not work out, let someone else say no. Also, gather some people close to you who will celebrate your successes and whose successes you can feel good about celebrating too. Gabrielle, welcome. It's really nice to have you here.
Thank you so much, Heather and Ron. Thank you to AQR, which is such a special journal. It's so robust. I feel like every time I get an issue in the mail, it feels like an event. It feels like there's so much nourishment in that journal. And I know I'm going to discover something new every time. So it's an honor to be invited to read as a part of this series. It was an honor to have some poems appear in the pages years ago now. I'm going to read one of those in a bit, but I'm going to start with a poem that was published this week because it's on my mind, because it just came out in Image. And this poem is called Sabbath. Round white mushrooms emerge in clusters overnight, soil scattered across their brows like Catholics bearing ash. It's taken me almost a decade to admit it. I've missed feeding all my thoughts through that revolving blade, so thin it could only be felt. I've missed that arrowing of the, I almost said soul, but it was the mind mostly, wasn't it, that winnowed? I knew God listened, and I knew where to aim. All the time, every second, I lacked, but with aim. I shared this on Twitter, but early on in my poetry writing journey, I had a teacher who thought I was using the word God too much, I guess, and he forbid me to use it in any more of my poems. And at the time, I lacked a defiance that I really respect in other people. I was very obedient. I was very easily mortified. And so I took that rule way too much to heart, and I really cut myself off from writing about certain aspects of faith that I was raised on for a long time. And it feels good to break that rule in poems now, intentionally and purposefully. This next poem is called Time Lapse. A hummingbird is pulled like a bull toward the loudest reds, lands on the inmost branch to preen, where only I can see the arching back of her green torso. I think of the sentence the boy, man, said to me while I lowered myself to a frameless, twin-sized mattress. Your neck looks so breakable. In a time lapse, nothing happens smoothly. Red horns quake as they splinter from limbs on the bottle brush. It was never the same after that. Dancing, walking around the cemetery I liked to visit when the weather was good, buying groceries after sundown. And what did I say to him? Did I say, thank you? So many years ago, when I had the great fortune to have a few poems appear in APR, this was one of them. It has changed a bit since then. I'm a relentless reviser, and I'm not sure there's going to be a single poem in my book that comes out next year that hasn't been changed in some way since it appeared in a journal. So this is the poem now, but the original version appeared in AQR. It's called Self-Portrait as Provincial. We were getting too close, so I flew solo to another continent. Exactly how long ago, it's difficult to say. The seasons change less here these days. I paint the sheep in thick winter fleeces, despite the fact it's autumn and the ponds are snowless ovals far below. Again and again, the herd charges, and I'm left bashing at their heads with a rock in each hand. Rams will do it, their horns curving around and up, pointing into your body twice at once. They'll carry you around the fells like a platter. I've felt it many times. In tandem, the two spikes making room in my side as I tried to run away, hoisted before its eyes, becoming its eyes, looking out over the ponds far below, yet to freeze. And the sheep keep eating. Their lower jaws make circles in the air as I watch on, as my paints sit on the grass in a white box. The ram, unable to shake me, bucks his head up and down, and I sink lower onto his horns. He rubs me against the wall of rock. The world is dark for the ram now. He weeps for himself, and the rock weeps for having seen this, and I weep, for I have become the winter I wanted. I read poems like that and I think, wow, I used to write wilder poems. Got to get back to that a bit. More imagination there than in some of my more recent poems. This next poem is in a tradition I've been thinking about a lot for a few years, and I call it the Pre Elegy. So an elegy for someone who is still alive. And it feels related to me to, the idea of a memento mori, something that invites us to appreciate what we have while we still have it, by sort of imagining that next step. And this is in that tradition. It's called Salmon. My father and I sit at a sushi bar in my new city, sampling 3 different kinds of salmon nigiri. He tells me about a great funeral speech he recently heard a son give for his father. The speech was structured around regrets everyone assumed the father didn't have, interspersed with hilarious stories involving boys crashing the family van and fishing mishaps. The ivory salmon is pale and impossibly soft. The sliver of steelhead, orange enough to pretend it's salmon. How else to say it? I am my father's only child, and he is my mother. We dip our chopsticks into a horseradish paste, dyed green and called wasabi. I know his regrets. I could list them. But instead, at his funeral, I will talk, if I can talk, about nights like this. How good it felt just to be next to him, to be the closest thing he had. I'm going to end with this next poem as a shout out to my hometown in Birmingham, Alabama. It's a hometown poem, and it's called Strawberries. A car's tires thunk over the rubbery black tripwire at the oil change, triggering a fat bell, and a group of girls in silver leotards are reflected like spatters of sap in its windows, liquidine, firm, gleaming. It's a game day. They are the girls chosen to split in tempo to the brass band, heel of a front foot sliding over astroturf, top of a back foot grinding over lit green, cervix slapping the 50-yard line like a fried egg flipped down on a griddle to burn. Behind the bleachers, a boy takes off the shirt of another boy, paints a letter there in red paint, R, and then another boy, I-O-T. When the sun goes down over the ridge, all the painted boys will make patriots. For now, the sun rises, sanctioning the street, Jiffy Lube, pet store, the Sam super sandwiches teens file into, practicing the joke of language. The morning is cool on the outside and hot in the restaurant. The war in the words, playful as a war can be, meaning each gut bleeds out like a slit pig's, filling the cracks in linoleum, spilling over, becoming smooth. The layers of red dry and build on one another. And for years, the gap between ceiling and floor lessens. Backs hunch as the mind saws downward, revealing rings. In the parking lot, "Are you asleep?" says the boy who was not my boyfriend, running his fingers along the band of my underwear. Across the street from this, for years, an ancient tortoise roams the floor of the pet store, closing his army green beak around the red toenails of sandaled women, thinking them strawberries. I feel ashamed for all the moments I've been kind, knowing kindness is all it would take. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabrielle. That was great. It was nice to start with you and to meet you. And I can see why your book is being published. Stuart.
Wow, those are marvelous poems. Thank you so much. It's really my great honor and privilege and pleasure as well to read here tonight, to be here virtually at the Alaska Museum and to read for, excuse me, Alaska Quarterly Review and its editor, Ron Spatz, that have provided a forum venue for poets, fiction writers, artists, creative nonfiction writers, photographers, essayists, a magazine that's both enduring and consistently showing a kind of intellectual curiosity with each new issue, and a magazine and an editor that have been particularly generous to me as well. And so I'm very grateful. And thank you, Heather, also for your introduction. I'm going to be reading poems tonight from my new book, The Lookout Man, which will be out at the end of March. And I'll start with Lines of the Prodigal. I go back to the street I grew up on to see if the house I grew up in still stands. But new people tore down our cottage by the cold green sea and built themselves something large like a huge coconut cake on a tiny dessert plate. Not at all like our house that fit just right. My picture window faced the sea, where the sun rose and I was the sun in a gold-painted room now gone. No one sought my advice or permission. They would not have found me if they tried to ask whether they could alter this crucial evidence of my past for eternity. I knew when I woke the paint that lit my room was not real gold. I could say I once was a happy boy inside, but won't. Lines about ships at sea. People who live inland forget about ships at sea. Their massive smokestacks and tall decks light towers, ramps, and nimble cranes, bridges, conning towers, and the high keels, terrifying on the open sea to behold. The stinky ones carting trash, the tuna canning factories afloat, Japanese whalers with their eternal bad karma, battleships, aircraft carriers, transports, trawlers, freighters, barges, container vessels, and supertankers carrying LNG. Semi-illuminated, the ocean liners wait at dawn outside the port for the armada of tugboats. Down the gangplank goes the procession of passengers and crew. The captain has a pleasant smile and keeps his hand locked in a permanent wave like Admiral Byrd frozen at the pole. On other piers, stevedores and forklift operators transfer the cargo to the acres of metal warehouses beside the gas farm. Picture the ancient crafts adrift in the mind, caravels and square riggers, argos, barks, and brigantines, windjammers, schooners, clippers, and galleons, and the vile slavers and rum runners. Pirates still board craft in the Persian Gulf and off the Horn of Africa, but it's oil they're after, not gold. Yet the odd yacht is sometimes found, renamed and painted, fate of its owners guessed at with throat-cutting gestures. People who live inland forget about ships at sea. The storms on the prairie only slow the interstates. Sometimes in the night, one hears the whistle of a train, but it's nothing like the horn of a ship in the fog at sea. Lines about mountains. I just learned that mountains kill more people climbing down them than making their brave ascent, and that some have the oldest rocks on the earth. Small wonder they crumble into avalanches, having weathered eons to fall. Mountains must get tired with so many people climbing them and bored with the endless boot prints of alpinists in bright garb, the flagpoles jammed into crags, piton and foothold, the kick of the crampon, metal ladders across crevasses. More climbers die each summer on Mont Blanc than all the Himalayas, its summit not as perilous but more frequented than Everest or K2. I conclude the nearer mountain is far more dangerous than the distant one, just as we are more likely to be killed by the hands of someone we know. It's not so pleasant. Lines about rivers, then the sea. I don't like to swim in rivers. Their lengths and bends trouble me. If my chest touched against river weeds, I would panic. No, I don't like to swim in rivers, but I admire them for being relentless. Even blind rivers buried under cities are rivers that run just a few days a year. Some rivers create borders between states and nations. Some rivers stray from their courses or are dammed from flowing to neighbors. I very much like the word estuary and the thought of boats at low tide there. And I appreciate how a river divides Pest from Buda, Minneapolis from St. Paul, or the banks someone decided were left and right. A current is like a river in the sea. When I was small, I lived along the beach. When I got caught in a riptide, a passing wave brought me home. Lines about the wind. All fuss and bluster, the wind is busy. It has a long way to go across the wide seas in one long breath. clearing its throat down the avenues of commerce. The wind is master of the clouds, sends scraps and dust along the highways. The wind can be fresh and the wind can be ill. Everyone has mixed feelings about the wind. The Scirocco, the Santa Ana, and the Mistral, which sounds like mistress and minstrel, all make you crazy. You can blame the wind when you hate your job or beat your kids, go off with your colleague for a dirty weekend. But no one likes it when the wind quits and stops the chimes in the park and stalls the sailboats in the public fountains, and the blades cease spinning on the prairie, and gutter leaves halt running toward erosion. And no breeze lifts the horse's tail or dries the sweat on a baby's neck. The letter carrier has left his little truck open. The wind is blowing away my debts. Two more poems. This one's for my friend Lucy Brock-Broido. I don't know why, except I think she would have laughed at it. So it's called Lines in the Backyard. Have you seen the lights in the windows of the trees? No one is at home there unless you count what's wild. Do you know the names of everyone asleep in your leaves? I am not just talking about genus and species. It's hard work keeping up with the new ones, or those passing through the yard for the night. Once I saw an owl perched on a low-limbed tree. I never did get its name because it took off soon. Jake the vole rode its talons to the stars. He never came back, but a new Jake lives here now. Lines along a wild place. And thank you again for inviting me to be part of this evening. I walked through the enterprise of weeds. A crow for each of us stood mounted on a fence. Sometimes I miss everyone I ever loved when their faces reflect in the hard, wide leaves of the magnolia. Their names like blossoms and their lives once so real and fragrant, now like handkerchiefs beneath the trees. If my dog were still alive, he might piss on them, and I would have to yell at him not to if anyone were around. If anyone were around, I would say I had momentous news to tell, but forget what it is. I will ask the dogwoods to remind me what it means to live along the edges of the woods, to be promiscuous, but bear white flowers. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. That was just delightful. Thank you very much. And Nancy, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. I feel very lucky to be reading with Gabrielle and Stuart, and I'm really looking forward to your new books. So thank you so much. I want to thank Alaska Quarterly Review for inviting me to be part of this reading. I'm really honored. Thank you, Ron Spatz. It's nice to finally meet you remotely. Thanks, Cody and Heather. Pumpkin Turning Yellow is the Face of a Discharged General, Autumn 2019. James Wright, what would you think of us now? These days, to be a discharged general is generally to be right. The sallow faces of pumpkins are now the faces of a president lying again and again and again at the ends of vines askew in the autumn fields. Harris Farms sells sunflowers $1 a stalk. In buckets they loom, and one by one they are stark and strong. So heavy the thought of taking one home is a little alarming. 3.9 million ghosts coming out of the shadows are being chased back in. Every evening, the deer step into the yards to graze, and sometimes even onto the road, where their hooves ring hollow like little bells. The willows go dusky inside before dusk, then withdraw along with the other trees under the aloft mercy of the moon. Well, this poem was published in Alaska Quarterly, and it will be in my forthcoming chapbook called Human Figures, which will be out in February on Diagram, New Michigan Press. It's based on a 1950s photograph. 4 mannequins with suitcases dressed for a journey. I can understand raindrops can distort the song of birds, so we may not know which direction the song is coming from. But I don't understand the uncanny valley, the changeless faces of mannequins, or the factory owner who says she walks among their bodies at night and is not afraid. Can they even be said to have bodies? Made with care, she says, made individually, and I'm hearing affection not unlike how birds in cages begin to sing when the shower comes on. Whatever they hear must resemble something important by instinct. Bodies, yes, in the sense of giving form to what was once abstract. For instance, 4 mannequins in travel wear, each figure's attitude an ode to patience, same as wasted time, same timetable to read, same train about to come. The window sign, Vogue, suggests. Then words too small to read without a telescope. This might have mattered, what we wore on Earth, faces they wore, that bright, alert urbanity makes out of poise, and why we wanted them that way. The factory workers are sanding haunches and torsos, tops of heads, anywhere a mannequin gets round, and the workers seem to do this respectfully, I swear. Of course, they know they're being filmed. A gentle roar is how I do not want to describe the sound of falling water heard at a distance. Dull instead of gentle doesn't get us any closer in a shopping mall to why the mannequins all are headless now. Headless has happened before. It will happen again. We are passing through yet another definition of apperception I do not quite understand. Instinct, a prompting, maybe why the heart recoils at what resembles such composure, bright faces, pointless gestures, never to suppose an end to come, not even lightly. Old dog, old friend, old night. It seems you can't help me. You can't help anyone. In a way, I have invented you, so it isn't your fault you are not there, like no one sitting outside on the steps. This absence feels closer than any version of having broken up with, say, a childhood house. Broken up not because someone else is living there, because walking through its rooms is like being trapped in a shopping mall all night and scared of myself because nobody shops at night. Herbert arrived at prayer as something understood. Though you are not God, and I don't think of this as prayer, but I'm grateful for any clues to your deep and provisional silence. Other nights, I'm able to take a mental walk to the lake, and mostly it isn't lonely. The houses come back as I get near, and so does that field of uncut grass. Sometimes a deer arrives at the end of the woods or back between houses. The now gone dog is always asleep on a certain stoop and dreaming its way past death. Sometimes I don't even get as far as the lake. And if I do, I can't seem to summon it except as a darkish blank beyond the seawall and the meager beach. However far I get, I always start at the house on Aylesworth. This is a real place. I'm serious. You can find it on Google Earth. And while you do, I'll think of the angels in Giotto's Lamentation looking down, weeping and pressing their hands and robes to their eyes as if trying on a grief that could turn off every light on earth. Old dog, old friend, old night. I don't know why I can never seem to imagine your side of the conversation. There are companies looking into ways of restoring to us our dead as virtual presences. We'll be able to joke with them. We can ask them for advice, but nobody's solved the need for multi-turn conversations. Those ways that together used to drift some days. Some days you don't even have to be there. What I just got from you was a feel of what matters, like something small I know to be true about birds, a thing so common as not to need to be remembered. Maybe about flying, maybe not, but part of the present situation, a momentary sense, or just being here, listening for the bird or angel behind a cloud or door. Let's see. I guess I would say about this one that Franz Marc was a German painter who, when he was a soldier in World War I, kept a sketchbook of pencil drawings. And these next two poems are pencil poems. How to camouflage the essence of the animal. The peaceful horse, for starters, has to go. Cradled by pencil lines, it grazes on, head down, its eyes a smudge. The poor horses, writes Franz Marc in a letter home. Horse with a burst appendix, moaned and groaned like a human being. Shadows, trees, a field come to mean dodging, a deception, bunk. Artillery, a combat boot, the rows of huts covered in blotches of green-brown paint to look like leaves, a sniper snugged inside the artificial carcass of a horse. No Prussian blue, earth red, no alizarin crimson here. Then how with graphite to disguise inner necessity of the horse, the anima, now rolling joyfully in hay, now to die from infection, now sigh, like a man being shaken out of a lively dream, no longer sweetly present, now lower its head to the unfinished dream of a pencil. Surf's Up, and you may recognize that from a song. Surf's Up. In a sketch of horses, pencil is a softer means, line and shade and smudge, approximation, all the tones in gray as it tracks the meticulous blur of a horse's leg in the act of galloping almost away. I would learn to say things softer as water maybe reaches shore. There are signs of rotation tonight, too high in the clouds to have anything to do with us down here. Not yet, don't worry yet. Counties north and south are getting clobbered by a million lightning strikes. Here, it's sort of a muted flickering on the other side of the clouds. Take cover, shouts the Channel 3 weatherman to those distant counties. Sometimes you have to say it that way, like blowing through a grass blade anchored between the thumbs. But in some far off over there at the lake, maybe, it doesn't have to be. The storm is over. Once the lake is quiet, a storm doesn't matter anymore. I imagine the barely audible sound of a pencil sketching the Lake Michigan shoreline. Sky full of cirrus, uncinus high above, mare's tails, they call them. -40 below up there. You wouldn't even breathe anymore. Maybe finally we could talk. Is there a room for those crystal threads? Surf's Up. I'm hearing the voice of Brian Wilson sail so high from amid his and anyone's muddled life, right in the middle of everything. There it is, Surf's Up, a moment of clarity, a moment of forwardness, slides out of words into I can almost hear you way on the other side. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Nancy. Surf's Up indeed. Thank you all. That was, I'm still sort of just sitting and thinking. I could listen to all three of you read all night long, I think, in the variety, and yet the similarities. It was pretty cool. The one thing I was thinking, and I don't know how you feel about this, if you want to just discuss it among yourselves, really, but all of you had pretty powerful poems about going home or imaginary going home. Stuart's old house. Gabrielle went back to Alabama, to Birmingham. Nancy, just a great title, The Old Dog, Old Friend, Old Night. And I wonder if you could talk about that, how the places maybe that we've been before that we're not there anymore become the kind of the meat of poems, and how maybe that what that pull is, or maybe why that is, or how you feel about that. And if you don't want to talk about that, that's okay. If you'd rather talk about something else, but I'm kind of fascinated by that as we go back in time. And I used to think it was maybe just a nostalgia as I got older, but then our youngest poet here at the same thing, goes back to her hometown in Alabama too, and why we do that, and how we do that in poems is fascinating to me anyway. Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Well, I will, because I actually had a thought when I was putting the reading together and thinking about that first poem I read, that I consistently have written poems about my childhood home, I think, in every book that I've done. In fact, I know that my thesis from graduate school has a kind of long poem in sections, a meditation on my childhood home. So obviously it's a touchstone for me, and meant a great deal. And I, lived there, for 18 years. And the day I left for college, my father put a for sale sign in the yard. He was so happy to be done with child rearing and living in Atlantic City, New Jersey. So that was the end of it. But it remains in poetry.
I'm thinking about that Louise Glick quote, "We look at the world once and childhood, the rest is memory." It's a quote that, it's famous for a reason. It resonates with me, certainly, as a poet who considers herself very image driven. This idea of those first images that really sear into the mind and haunt forever. They mutate and change, and we conjure them back, but there's something about those first impressions and those first things we see that are imbued with some sort of emotional turmoil. Usually it's just a rich place for poetry. And I think what we see when we're young, before we really have language faculties to describe and grapple with it, there's something necessary when one is an adult about doing something with that early material that we didn't necessarily have the language to deal with at the time. So those are a few of the thoughts that swirl around. I really appreciated both of the other, childhood home poems that we heard tonight.
I guess I would say I'm always a little homesick for where I just left, wherever that may be. And the poem is a way to go somewhere. And I'm also thinking about what Holden Caulfield said, that once you start telling about people, you miss everybody, and that's kind of the way it is. The more you, I guess I'll just be personal. The more I write about it, the more I miss it, and I want to explore that.
I think of Larkin's.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Sorry, I was thinking of Philip Larkin's lines when Gabrielle was speaking before, and also something Nancy had said, "A home is so sad, it stays as it was left, shaped to the comfort of the last to go, as if to win them back, instead bereft of anyone to please, it withers so, having no heart to put aside, the theft, etc., etc. But a kind of beautiful poem about, I think, exactly what we're all talking about. And, I guess the trick is thinking about Salinger is to have the strong sentiment towards it that we have, and not to love it more than God did and become sentimental. And I think therein lies the danger of our childhood abodes. But strong imagery, I think, transforms it.
I love Nancy. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go. You go. I'm more.
I love Nancy, this idea of like poem as time travel or space travel that you mentioned. I think a lot about what we can do in poems, and perhaps in all writing and art, that we can't do with like our physical corporeal bodies. And, in these last few years of the pandemic, when, travel isn't, as much of a thing, and there's so much we can't do, I think the page offers a really crucial space to see other places and go other places and do other things. It gives a space for some of that trapped energy to go. And I'm really grateful for that.
Okay, so now maybe I'll jump in. I love hearing you all talk, and you're much wiser and more interesting than I am. The one question I was going to ask is that if any of you are, I know that Stuart and Gabrielle aren't in their hometowns, but Nancy, came from sort of the Midwest, but I don't know if any of you are still living in your home areas at all, or have ever gone back to be in those places. And then I was kind of wondering if the emotion comes from the distance, rather than people who are, poets rooted in, who are living in their, grandfather's house still on the farm or whatever, writing, if that's a different type of memory or sentiment to back up Stuart's observation a little.
I'll just say that I am from the Midwest, and I grew up partly in Illinois, and now I live in Michigan, and that's really helpful not to live in the same state. And it's a different sort of place. Also, this is just a side comment. I like the Midwest because it's not sublime. It's beautiful, but it's not sublime. And so it gives you more to do, basically, as a writer, I think.
Well, all of you are also in different capacities, teachers or mentors. How do you coach young writers who are mining this same emotion and talking about their childhood or their first homes or things that I imagine that comes up a lot when you're working with younger people, and how do you counsel them to take a look at it, or do you advise a little more distance? Or maybe that doesn't come up.
No, I mean, that's a very, you go, Stuart.
No, you go.
Teaching is a small part of what I do, but I feel really fortunate to get to be in conversation with young writers on occasion, usually incredibly talented, just stunningly intelligent young writers. And I do a lot of just encouraging them to do more reading in relationship to their writing, just really hammering home the sort of collaboration that writing is between what we read and what we write. And in terms of thinking about home place, I really let their inclinations lead. Like if I notice that they have a need to write about home, then we go there. We talk about how to be really particular in that, and how to ask interesting questions about the role that their home place has had them and their lives. But if they seem drawn in other directions, we go in that direction. I don't necessarily dictate that they must write about home or place. But I think it's interesting how the place we grow up enters our poetics, whether we want it to or not, and whether we notice it or not. So I do think those can lead to really interesting conversations.
I do too. I mean, the fact that I grew up in Atlantic City is something that for a period of my life, I wasn't so public about. I loved living in Boston for many years before I came to North Carolina. In fact, when I think of retirement and I think of going back, I don't really think of going back to Atlantic City because it doesn't really exist in much of a shape or form. I'm not sure Boston does either with all of its tech, but having been around for 300-400 years, it seems to have more vestiges of itself when I checked in on it last. But for me, I guess I would like to not be among the alien corn down here in North Carolina, though I've been here nearly 30 years. I think I'd like to max out watching the Red Sox win or lose on a bar stool in Boston with a dumb cap on my head. Rather than, though I love living in North Carolina and it's beautiful here, it's really not my home and it's not my countryside. Mon passage.
I grew up in a suburb, or at least spent some of my high school years there, and there was a house on the next block that was exactly the same house as ours. It even had the same wallpaper mural, it just in different colors. So I guess I'm always delighted when students write about childhood. What I find is that if they are specific as possible, then their poems are incredibly fresh. If they get to the details, if they remember specifics, those lead them somewhere really interesting. And so some of their best poems are fresh that way. If they look at images. And I don't teach anymore, but I'm remembering it with pleasure.
Well, thank you all very much. This has really been enlightening and wonderful, and a really great way to start, coming back into 2022 with this series. What a wonder all of you are and the work that you shared, and thank you for helping to support Alaska Quarterly Review by doing this. I know you're all busy and have a lot going on, so it's we're grateful. And I also, as we're wrapping up, I want to thank you for joining us today for AQR's 2021-2022 literary series. And on behalf of the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, all our gratitude again for the generosity of today's writers, to Nancy and Gabrielle and Stuart. And one way you can support them is by buying their books at your local bookseller, or to subscribing to a literary journal like AQR. And also thank you to Cody Carver and the Anchorage Museum at the Rasmussen Center who produced this program. And again, if you're enjoyed the program, please consider making a donation to Alaska Quarterly Review so that we can continue to bring you the work of writers like you heard today. Their voices are more important now than ever. Ron, the last word is yours. As always.
Thank you, Heather. And I want to echo what you said. I mean, thank you so much, Stuart, Gabby, and Nancy. Wow. I'm going to just say, wow. It is just wonderful to have such just great people together. And the fact that you've been in our pages and then we bring you together like this is just something very special. Thank you, Heather, once again for devoting a lot of your time to our series for the second year in a row. Very grateful to you. And you've done it not only with style, but sometimes having to deal with adversity and overcoming it and do one of these events. And I also echo our gratitude to the Anchorage Museum, Cody in tech, and Julie Decker, the director of the museum. And so with that in mind, in 2 weeks, Friday, January 28th, we'll meet again on our pièces de résistance, to feature 3 exceptional fiction writers, Anjali Sachadeva, Catherine Heine, and Maria Edelman. It should be absolutely fabulous again. That's January 28th. It's a Friday. Same time, 4 p.m. Alaska, 8 p.m. Eastern. So for now, from Alaska Quarterly and from Anchorage, thanks to everyone for joining us. And so great to see you all. To the next time.